Welcome to the Discover Montcalm podcast, where we're going to take a look at the communities, the businesses, the attractions, and the people that make up Montcalm County. Here is your podcast host, Duane.
Welcome to the Discover Montcalm podcast. I've got Mike Scott, a Howard City resident, a former retired village council member, and he currently sits on the Montcalm Road Commission. Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
Give me a little history about you. Did you always grow up here? Give me a little. Let's learn a little bit more about Mike.
I'll back up a little bit before me. In the 1880s, my great-grandfather came here. Okay. Raised his family here. My grandfather and three of his sisters lived here. My dad, my aunt lives here. And in the 1940s, during World War II, my dad went off to war. He was married. And I was born in Seattle, Washington while he was serving out there. And when I was about 2 months old in 1945, we moved back to Howard City. And I've lived here ever since, except for 2 years when I was in the Army serving the country.
Back in 2018, I had an opportunity, a very in-depth interview with Mike. And we're going to go back to that interview. And at the end of it, we're going to bring you up to date from 2018 to 2022. So right now, let's go back and listen to an interview I did with Mike back in 2018. What do you remember about growing up here?
Basically, back in those days, you knew everybody in town. You didn't know people's addresses. You'd ask them, they were looking for somebody, they'd tell you, you didn't know right where they lived. Today, you know, things changed. There's a lot more move-ins and outs than there used to be, and it was a little quieter time, I always thought anyway. Good memories. I was, either you can call it fortunate or unfortunate. I had my grandparents and three great aunts lived on Main Street at that time. And so as growing up as a child, I was kind of limited into being able to get away with anything.
Was there a point in your life that all of a sudden you started looking at what it took to make this community?
Growing up, I was always aware of what was going on. My dad, earlier in his career, had a gas station here on this. He had two different gas stations. One's not here anymore. Well, but neither one. They're both tore down. My grandfather had run the gas station, and I worked at Smith's grocery store in high school and trimmed Christmas trees. So I was always involved in working at a business that was in town. And when you work at a business, you get a feel that that's what it takes to keep the community going. Mm-hmm. And back in those days, there was Labor Day always had a big celebration. Downtown was closed off for 2.5 blocks, and there was carnival right in the middle of business. And then in the earlier days, the business would close on Thursday afternoon, but they'd be open Friday night. And everybody'd come to town on Friday night, and it gave you that feeling of community versus just people coming in to shop. Okay. You know, the farmers would come in, they'd be sitting on the street talking while their wives were getting groceries or vice versa. And it was just I call it a slower pace. I don't mean it was happier, but it seemed happier at that time to me. It's closer.
Okay. And that would have been what years? Would that be 50s?
Mid-50s. Yes.
Mid-50s? Okay. And you graduated early 60s?
63.
Okay.
First class from Tri-County.
Okay. Tell me about that.
In 1950, I started kindergarten. And I started in the old school here on Edgerton Street. And I stayed in that school until I graduated. I did get summers off. All the elementary and senior high, junior high, senior high are all in the same building. And that's the way I went to school. During that time, lower classes were moved out later on, and it was basically junior high and high school. But it's still, basically, I started kindergarten in that building and graduated from that building.
So, college, get married. What years was that, and what was it like on the early years raising a family here, and how did that change as the years went on?
I got married in 1969, and this is a good community to raise a family in. Not quite the amenities we got today, but it was good. It's a small town. We had good law enforcement, and I think kids then had a little different outlook than they do today on what's important. And yes, they raised heck and different things like all of us did growing up, but not to the destructive type stuff. And my wife, of course, she grew up next door to where we live now, and she was always going to move away. She wanted out of this town. And as we got married and had our children, they got involved in school, we got involved in the community, and decided this isn't a bad place to live. And when you drive around, it's a very good place to live, looking at other communities.
Well, I guess from your perspective, and because you've sat on different, in different offices and that
Right.
type of thing, and you do have, probably more so than others, an idea of, you were aware of it because your grandpa had
Right.
so you were kind of aware of what the economy was and then what it is today. What transitions have been made, good, bad, or indifferent? I mean, you talked a little bit about businesses shutting down.
In the 60s when I got married, like I said, I was working, in fact, I worked in construction here in town on the sewer project. And that was for about a year and a half, and that was a boon for a lot of local people because there weren't a lot of jobs then, and there was still quite a fair amount of business here and so on. But after that, when that was done, I went to work in Grand Rapids in the road construction business. And so I was out of touch with a lot of the, except coming home at night and getting up early in the morning going to work. So, and we had our restaurants and the coffee shop and a few of the stores, but and Wolverine had closed down here in Howard City by then. And that was quite a loss for jobs here anyway. A lot of local people were employed there. And I know they went to Big Rapids or Rockford in the move, but that had quite an effect on probably the local businesses, in my estimation, is because they weren't buying stuff here. When they're in Big Rapids, they're in a shop after they get out of work, and that definitely hurt the town. And I watched when I was growing up, there's 3 grocery stores on Main Street, and then there was 2, and then there's 1, and then there's none. So we lost our downtown identity. And when a community loses its downtown identity, I think they lose a lot of positives for the community. You lose people. People aren't downtown intermingling anymore. They go to the supermarket, buy what they get, and they go home. There isn't this, you don't get a chance to meet with your neighbors, so to speak. And as things got busier through those times in the 60s, 70s, people were getting more mobile all the time. So they weren't spending the time in one community. They'd go off here. I'll jump in the car and go to Grand Rapids, only a half hour.
Right.
Where before, you'd plan for that trip next Friday we're going to load up and go to Grand Rapids. I can remember those early days on the council when it came budget time. It was a struggle. When you lose business, you lose tax revenue. And we got more debt with the water and sewer system, and it was a struggle for quite a few years. I can remember years. In 1976, Ray Bennett was president at that time. He appointed me president. The council appointed me president pro tem in Ways and Means, which meant I worked on the budget. And I can remember the struggles we went through to actually pay bills, and there was times when we could not do anything on the budget until in July when we started collecting taxes. That's how tight things were back then. Today it's transitioned and there's money and the village is running a lot smoother.
Let's just talk, just a little brief caveat, if we could, about Wolverine. Where were they? How long had they been here approximately?
Let's say the 60s, and on the north side of Main Street, and today is the one building's vacant, the Pizza Cafe, and half of the building that Kendall's, the west building they own, was Wolverine Glove Factory. They made gloves here. L.D. Eldred was the foreman, and they sewed gloves here. And then it would be in the 70s is when they left. In fact, as they left, and then on the south side where the Senior Action Center is now, was Tuttle's Hardware, and then Matson's bought Tuttle out. And when Wolverine went out, Matson moved to the north side of Main Street and took over the Wolverine buildings.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember Matson's being there,
Right.
personally.
We hope you're enjoying our podcast, and we'll be back after we thank our sponsors. West Michigan Technology and Design Solutions, your IT and web hosting experts. westmichiganhelpdesk.com. And DW Video, your source for video production, websites, and your local videotape, slides, and 8mm film transfer specialist. dwvideo.com. Now, back to our interview.
As an outsider myself, looking at Howard City and looking at things and how I saw growth, how I saw the industrial park come in, how I saw different things, it made me have a lot of confidence in the fact that at some point, and you talked about the sewer project, I think that happened because someone was forward thinking.
It was not a progressive plan. It was septic tanks, and a lot of the sewage did go to the Tamarack Creek. So the DNR, DEQ, those organizations put a lot of pressure on the village to put the sewer system in. The people that planned it, my father was on the village council at that time, he was part of it, planning, not dumping the sewer. When they knew they were going to have to do it, they didn't do the minimum. They put a large system in, as much as they could possibly afford at that time, which was good forward thinking, to make it as big as they could possibly afford, even though some of it was overkill. But for the expansion, and it did pay off. I mean, actually the initial sewer system did not go up to the industrial park. That was done in the 90s. So the water system was expanded up there at that time too, and part of that was because of demand for fire protection and so on with Fortifiber and those companies that were here at that time.
Well, that's interesting because and that's what I like about this project. One thing is I wasn't completely set on my facts. The fact that they had to do it,
right?
But they made it bigger is a great little bit on growth.
Back in the 90s, when we did that expansion, we added 2 lift stations, one that's on the corner of Munchner and Washburn, and the other one on Lake Montcalm and Hinkle, or Munchner, depending which side of the road you're on. And that covers that will take care of that whole area. And the village has capacity for expansion, their sewer ponds and the water supply system. And if you want to shift a little bit to the water, that was also changed in the 90s when we had the Renaissance Zone and we got some MEDC money. We put a new water well in up on Orton Street, and brand new feed well to that tower, which we went from a 75,000 gallon water tower to a 330,000 gallon water tower. The expansion, one thing with water, is in sewer you can do it with lift stations. When you add on, if you don't have the fall you need, you can put them in and put a lift station in and pump it. Water supply is a little bit different because you have to maintain a pressure. So any expansion beyond where we are going west on Orton Street, or Shaw Street, I'm sorry, is probably going to, at some point in time, if we went out to the expressway, I'm speaking for another different council I'm not involved with, but if that was ever to expand out there, there'd probably have to be another water tower added to maintain the pressure and water supply we need. And a lot of communities you see where Rockford's got 2 or 3 water towers, it's because of maintaining the pressure needed.
So from the time, back, you were on the council for 40 years. And part of the and that led into the Downtown Development Authority.
Right.
I mean, because they kind of, at some point, they kind of do this. I mean, they're all out for the betterment of the area.
Yeah, the Downtown Development Authority was built. That was an opportunity for communities to do a tax, they call it TIF finance, tax increment financing, where you develop this authority or the district, and then you basically freeze the tax base at what it is at that time. The community still collects that. Any growth above that is what the DDA captures. So that's how the DDAs and those type of things are funded. And TIF funding, there's good and the bad. It takes some away from the schools, it takes some away from the communities, but also it helps where a community can't take those funds and put them into their general fund for operation. They have to be used for certain projects in the downtown or in that district. And it's a great tool because the DDA, when they've got enough money, can finance based on future income and do like we did on our streetscape downtown and improving Shaw Street. Those are real benefits that wouldn't happen without it.
I guess before we move into the county, you had something that you wanted to bring.
As we talked earlier, I had 40 years experience with the village council, and one of the things that I felt has always been a problem with small communities or even at the county level, and it's getting worse with younger people now, is the desire to participate. Communities run on input from all sectors, and we do not have enough of the younger generations taking part in our municipal government or understanding our municipal government. Older people aren't going to build it for tomorrow. They're on the downside of things, and they're perfectly happy with. And I'm not saying there aren't people that look to the future, but I've over the years I've seen the lack of interest from the younger generations to become involved with their community. Mm-hmm. And those communities need that participation. They need them there, and they need their input so they can be built the way they want them.
Talk about what history you know on the entire county, and what years and whereabouts in the county are you talking?
I really didn't get involved a lot with the county probably until in the 90s, when you're working every day, and I spent my extra time on stuff for the village. I'd have to go to certain meetings with the at county level, but not on a basis. When I retired, that's probably when I started paying attention to more what was happening with the county. And back then, farming was always big in Montcalm County, but it was getting bigger. That became one of it is our biggest industry right now. And the growth in Greenville, I happened to sit on these boards when Electrolux left, and Hitachi left Edmore, and what that does to a county, not only to the community they were in, but also to the tax base for the county. And I'm very concerned with, you could see the decline in revenues and decline in service. It was harder for the county to provide the services that they needed to provide. And today, where we are. We're in they're gaining back. They're fixing what was wrong, but it had a devastating effect on the county. Unfortunately, agriculture does promote, but not near like a Electrolux factory. But now with Dicastal and Foremost Dairy and those coming in, the Edmore's got the bag factory that they've refurbished into a farmer's market. And those are the things that are positives for the county. And we saw a need countywide to get more. We needed more involvement, more draw to bring industry to our county. So the Alliance at that time, through fundraising and commitments from communities and business and individuals, partnered with the Right Place in Grand Rapids, which has been one of the best things that's ever happened for this county.
Wow, we went through a lot of information. Let's jump forward from 2018 to now. What has changed in Howard City, and what has changed in the county since we did that interview?
Well, I'm not being as active in the community village of Howard City as I used to be. I keep up on what's going on, and they've done some real positive things. They had some sewer expansion work done to upgrade the system. They've worked in a deal with the Tri-County schools to accept their wastewater for their new schools complex they're going to have. So that's been positive. I think it's going to be good for the community, good for the village and the school. I think that'll be a positive for everything. County level, not serving on the county commission, but I have seen a lot of good things happening in the last 4 or 5 years. Pandemic, of course, affected them like it did everybody else, and I can digress a little bit to the road commission. It affected us because we had services to provide, and we had to keep people by themselves, and we kept them working. You can't work remotely grading a road, I'm sorry.
And certain things just happen, you got to keep on top of it.
Right.
So on a county level, I know that there's been some activity over in the Lakeview area. I know that Larry's Tire has now moved into Howard City. They brought all their. Can you give us an update on the county level?
Parker Hannafin industry in Lakeview has expanded. That's been good for their community. And Bernie Electric from Rockford has built a site over there that they're using now, and that's good growth for a community like Lakeview. And little things are happening. And I think they're all positive. And what really happens in Lakeview or Greenville or Edmore or Howard City, everybody benefits because there's people from here who work there and people from there that work here. So any growth in the county has been positive. The county's finances have really come around and they're able to do some things. And with this ARPA money, I know that there's other people who can speak better to that than me, but they've been able to help some of the communities too. So.
Last question that I have for you. Why should someone discover Montcalm?
It's a unique county, very diversified. Kind of like Grand Rapids, when the economy goes down, Grand Rapids is diversified where a lot of the industries keep working. It doesn't shut the whole town like Flint or Detroit. Montcalm County, with their agriculture and diversified industry, is a great place to live and have an opportunity to work. And we're close enough to the big communities where they can commute.
The expressway really helps us here.
Yes, it does.
On that note, thank you for tuning in. And remember to buy and shop locally.
Connect and subscribe to Discover Montcalm Podcast at discovermontcalmpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Discover Montcalm Podcast. To be featured in an upcoming show, contact Duane at 231-250-9624. Remember to subscribe at discovermontcalmpodcast.com.